Good afternoon and Assalamu alaikum to all of you. I'm sure you are as tired as me. I just came from Durham, 3 hours by train, and with a slight headache. Anyway, the topic, I think I have 45 minutes for the topic is integrating Waqf for realizing the social goals of Islamic finance. I have quite a few things to cover, so I'll just go directly to the presentation after a brief introduction. I'll talk about Waqf. I think most of us know a lot about Islamic finance. Now, as for Waqf, probably it is something which is new to some of you, probably not. So I'll go briefly over Waqf's history and the contemporary status, and then see how we can actually integrate this very traditional and very important institution with the Islamic financial sector to realize the social goals of the industry, and then conclude with some concluding remarks. Now, as for the topic itself, as you see, it's Waqf on one side and Islamic finance on the other. In some ways, these are very complementary concepts. We know that when Islamic finance was mooted, it was thought to be a part of an Islamic economy which would fulfill the maqasid or the goals of Sharia. So the implication was that it would have both legal and social orientations. But we see, at least a lot of observers think that this is not the case. So one way to actually, in some ways, bring in the social elements in Islamic finance to bring in Waqf. Now, Waqf or Awqaf, which is the plural of Waqf, historically played a very important role in bringing about not only socio-economic welfare, but also growth in economies. It acted as a third sector. In the past, the governments did not play the roles they play now in terms of providing social services and providing education, health. And in traditional Muslim societies, Waqf played this role, and it played very well. But if you look at this Waqf, and I'll actually present in a few slides what Waqf is, that in contemporary times the Waqf has become stagnant as a concept and also in practice. And as I said, when we talk about Waqf, most people think of a mosque or a graveyard. But the fact that in history, Waqf played a very important socio-economic role. Now, this is even more important because when we look at the economies, developed economies, we see that the third sector is playing more and more important role. And even in UK, you have Office of the Third Sector or civil society now, which the government is encouraging, and similar in many other countries, third sector plays a very important role. But we don't see the same role of Waqf in Muslim societies. Now, as I mentioned, the presentation basically is to see how we can integrate the Waqf and the financial sector. And to do that, I'll first go over some basic concepts of Waqf, its history, and what is the contemporary status. Now, Waqf basically literally means to stand still or hold still, not let go. The Malikis in North Africa, they use the word hubs for Waqf. Now, Waqf is actually like a trust. And if you look at some literature, some Western scholars, they have mentioned that the concept of trust actually comes from Waqf. And the first trust, one of the first trusts was the Oxford University Trust. And when you look at the history of it, they say that the concept was borrowed from Waqf. So it's very similar to a trust. You have a founder who basically dedicates some assets for something good. And this is done through a Waqf deed. So Waqf deed basically is the constitution or the law which governs a Waqf. The Waqf deed mentions what why the Waqf is created, what are the objectives, how the revenues or the fruits or services of the Waqf will be distributed, and also it mentions the management process and procedures of the Waqf. In traditional Waqf, usually there used to be a mutawalli in terms of a manager who used to mainly come from the family of the creator of Waqf and used to manage it. But the Waqf deed basically mentioned how this succession of managers would take place. The other features of Waqf is that it has to be for something good, and which means that it's very broad. It can be done for anything. And actually we see in history that Waqf was created for a very different, so many different kind of things. And I'll go over some of them later. The Waqf is usually perpetual, but it can be temporary. And actually we have a recent Islamic Fiqh Academy fatwa or resolution which allows temporary Waqf. So this is in some ways relatively new, but debated for some time. And there can be different types of Waqf. It can be for public or philanthropic purposes. It can be for family, or it can be mixed. You can create a Waqf where part of the benefits go to the family and part of it goes to the public welfare. And of course there can be categorized as charitable works, which are for social welfare kind of purposes, and religious work which are meant for religious institutions like mosques and for example cemeteries. If you look at the history of Waqf, the first Waqf was a religious Waqf, which is basically the mosque Masjid al-Nabi in Medina, created by the Prophet, peace be upon him, himself. But thereafter, when we look at the history of Waqf, we see that most of the Waqf were actually social Waqf. And the two Waqf which we find in history, the first social Waqf in history, are that created by Umar bin Khattab and Uthman bin Affan. Umar bin Khattab, he got an orchard in Khaybar, and he came to Prophet and asked him that he wanted to give it away in donation. And the Prophet advised him that, why don't you make it a Waqf, that you really don't give it away to people, but make it a Waqf so that the benefit from that orchard can be distributed to people. So he made that orchard as a Waqf, and the beneficiaries were his children and also others, the people, travelers, and the less unfortunate. The other Waqf we see in the initial stages is the well in Medina. When the Prophet ﷺ came to Medina, there was a well of Ruma, which was owned by an individual, and he used to sell water, and the water was very expensive. So Prophet gathered the Muslims and asked them who can buy this well and make it open to public. And Uthman bin Affan, he bought the well and made it open to use for everyone. So that was another Waqf created. And as we see that these Waqf were for social purposes. And from this practice, we see that most of the companions of the Prophet, they created Waqf, and this tradition continued in Muslim societies for a very, very long time. And we look at the history of Waqf, we see that Waqf were created for so many different things: public utilities, the roads, the lightening of the roads. You had most of the educational institutions were supported by Waqf. Healthcare system, the hospitals, research. And if you look at the history of Waqf, you see the refinement in the civilization actually. You had Waqf which were created to pay people, to give company to the old people and the sick. You had Waqf which were created for animals, land. Until very recently, a brother told me from Syria that there was a Waqf which was created long time back for old horses. So people who could not use the horses used to go and deliver this the horses in the Waqf, and the Waqf took care of the horses until it died. So they were worked for feeding birds. And if you look at, I think, the history of Islamic societies in the past, I think part of its greatness is because of the Waqf. And the Waqf, of course, can be created not only with properties, it can be created with cash, grains of seeds, and a lot of other things. And we see that in contemporary times, the notion of Waqf has in some ways been corrupted, and these roles which the Waqf played in the past is not being seen anymore. Now, to just give you some figures in terms of the extent to which Waqf played in Muslim societies, when in the Ottoman Empire was in the early 20th century, even the Ottoman Empire basically was during the last days of the Ottoman Empire, some towns in Turkey, 3/4 of their land and buildings were Waqf, which basically meant that they were used for social purposes. In other countries, Waqf reached 1/3 of the cultivable land. And there are some specific numbers from Palestine. Again, in the beginning of the 20th century, there are 233 Waqf deeds recorded, owning 890 properties compared to 92 private ownership properties, owning 108 properties. So you see that Waqf played a very important role in history, and a lot of it was devoted for social welfare purposes. Now, what is the status of Waqf? Due to different reasons, now Waqf has basically become a stagnant institution now. Both in concept, as I said, most people don't know that Waqf had this history. When you talk about Waqf, most people think it's a mosque or a graveyard. As a result, what has happened is it is not performing its socio-economic role. Now, what the problem with this is that one of the features of Waqf is you cannot actually sell it, because Waqf is usually dedicated for life. So you have in a lot of Muslim countries these Waqf properties which are not being used for socio-economic reasons, and also it is not being used for private purposes. So these are stagnant properties which are not basically contributing anything to the society. And a lot of Waqf properties are also lost due to different reasons, and one of the reasons is that the government has come in and tried to manage some of these properties. Now, before I go to see how Waqf can be again revived and integrated with the financial sector, I just want to show this slide on contemporary fiqh jurisprudence on Waqf. One of the contemporary scholars, Mustafa Zarqa, he mentioned that other than the concept of bir, which basically means goodness, everything in Waqf is open to ijtihad, meaning, because actually, if you look at the Quran and Sunnah, there's nothing specific about Waqf. So most of it is fiqh. And because it's fiqh, it is open to ijtihad. And we see in 2009 Islamic Fiqh Academy resolution that they have made Waqf very flexible. And in some way, this is a very, I would say, bold kind of fatwa, where they have broken away with a lot of traditional notions of Waqf. They have said that Waqf assets can be not only immovable properties, but sukuk, shares, services. And they have said that Waqf can be even temporary. And this is, as I said, in some ways a very new notion of Waqf. So if somebody has a property and wants to make a temporary Waqf, according to this resolution, they can do it. The earlier notion was that Waqf would always be perpetual. Now, moving on to the second part of the more substance of this lecture. How do we look at Islamic financial sector and Waqf, and how we can integrate the two? I have quite a few things to say, but given the time, I'll go over things quickly, and if there's some questions, I'll take them. Now, I think Waqf itself is a social a third sector which promotes socio-economic welfare in society. So we can look at two ways in which the Waqf and Islamic financial sector can be merged. One is that financial service um, as input to develop Waqf, and then we look at how Waqf itself can be an input in the Islamic financial sector to establish financial institutions which can promote socio-economic well-being. So we'll start with the first, where we see how financial services, this Islamic financial sector, can promote the development of Waqf itself. This can be done in two ways. One is through financing the Waqf properties. If you look at Waqf properties in a lot of Muslim countries, as I mentioned, they are a lot of these assets which can be developed. They are in very prime locations, and because they are not developed, the income from these assets are actually very small, if not nothing. Then the other thing which can be done is to offer these management services to manage the Waqf properties itself. Now, because of the nature of Waqf, we have to have some, special considerations in terms of what can be done in terms of financing. When property is given away as Waqf, the ownership, actually, there's no owner as such. The scholars, they say it is as if the ownership belongs to God himself. So given that you cannot, for example, use it as a collateral, you cannot sell it. So these are some of the constraints which come with the legal concept of Waqf. Now, one way is to directly finance the Waqf properties, and unfortunately, most Islamic banks are not doing it. There was a proposal in Bahrain some years back to actually create a Waqf bank, mainly to invest in Waqf properties, but then the crisis hit and the idea kind of died down. But Islamic Development Bank actually has a fund. It's called Waqf Properties Investment Fund. Sorry. It is a $50 million fund, and the sole purpose of this fund is to invest in Waqf properties. And they have done an excellent job in identifying different Waqf properties in IDB member countries, and invested in Waqf actually commercially. So it's not a charitable fund. They're there to make money, and it's very profitable because most of the Waqf properties are in very prime locations. And one of the properties I know they have financed is in Medina itself. As you know, Medina, and it's very close to the Masjid al-Nabi itself. So this is a very prime location. But the Waqf property was a library, and it's a very old building. Nobody used to visit it because of the poor conditions. And they invested in that property. What they proposed was that they're going to rebuild the library in a modern setting, and around the library they'll have a hotel, 4-star hotel, and that will be the income of the Waqf. And it was a very successful investment in terms of commercial, because in that location they'll be able to actually make a lot of money in terms of having a hotel rooms to sell. So I think this is a very innovative kind of fund which was established by IDB, and a very successful fund in terms of commercial viability. The second example, which probably some of you know, is the use of sukuk to raise funds and develop Waqf properties. And this is the Zamzam Towers in Makkah. They used sukuk al-intifa, which basically is timeshare bonds. It is again in the heart of Makkah, just outside the Masjid the Haram, the Masjid. There is Waqf property, where Bin Laden Group got a lease for 28 years to build 4 towers, a mall, and a hotel. Now, whether that's good or bad, that's something debatable. Then Bin Laden leased this to Munshat Real Estate for 28 years. And Munshat raised $390 million by issuing Sukuk al-Intifa timeshare bonds for 24 years. And basically now that building is ready and it's operational. Those who can go to Makkah can see the Zamzam towers right in front of Haram. So again, this is an example of how Sukuk is used to the Islamic financial sector is supporting the development of Waqf. The other example of a Sukuk was in Singapore, where they issued a Musharaka Sukuk to raise $60 million and develop two projects. And one of the projects was a mosque which was in a prime area location, and it was again an old building there were some shops around earning very small amounts. After the development, they not only have a new mosque but also an income of 200,000 Singaporean dollars annually. Again, using the Islamic finance instruments to develop Waqf. The other way in which the financial sector can help develop Waqf properties is to basically go into Waqf management. If you look at the history of Waqf, one of the problems which led to the degeneration and stagnancy of Waqf was the management of Waqf. You usually had these mutawallis who generation after generation used to manage these properties, and after 3, 4, 5 generations, you just needed one bad person to mismanage it, sell the Waqf, and basically the property is gone. So, and actually it was the mismanagement by the mutawallis, the managers, which led the government. One of the reasons the government came in was partly because of this mismanagement. But I think government coming in doesn't solve the problem, it creates more problems. The suggestion is to actually come up with these management corporations, just like the conventional financial sector has. They are corporate trust management organizations which manage, among others, trust and these kind of similar kind of assets. So the good thing about having an organization coming and managing Waqf properties is that you have, among others, permanence. A mutawalli or a manager dies, then you have to think of who will succeed. In case of an organization, as long as the organization is there, a corporation is there, the management of the property will go on. You get the expertise, professionals who can manage it properly, and also objectivity in terms of managing it. Now, one of the problems of mutawalli is that because it's an individual, may have his family, he would not be objective in terms of how he distributes the returns of Waqf. That will not be the case in case of a professional Waqf management organization. Now, the way this is done in a conventional finance is that you have two major ways to do it. One is the banks themselves, they have either departments or subsidiary which manages the trusts or Waqf. And then you have, the other thing is you have independent trustee companies which manages trusts. Now, we have examples of both. Unfortunately, one example is it's a failed example actually. We had in, I think 2006, 2007, Dubai Islamic Bank and DFC Investments, they came together and created a Waqf Trust Services Limited in 2007 in Dubai. Basically to manage, among others, Waqf properties. But after 2 years of operations, they had to close down, partly because they could not generate enough business. The other way is to have independent trust companies, trustee companies or Waqf management companies, which can manage the Waqf assets. And the example of this is Amana Raya in Malaysia, which manages both trusts, conventional trusts. They do not manage Waqf yet, but again, the problem in Malaysia is that if you create a Waqf, the government takes over. So if you want to create a Waqf type institution, you have to basically establish a trust and then a Manaraya can manage this trust on behalf of the person who has established. So these are the ways in which I think the Islamic financial sector can be used to develop the Waqf sector itself, and indirectly help the third sector grow in Muslim countries. The other way to look at how Waqf can be used is to basically, so I think I've skipped this. These are basically the services which can be provided, services of a mutawalli and advisory services. The other way in which we can integrate the Islamic financial sector Waqf is basically to use Waqf in the financial sector itself. And this can be done in different ways. I've identified 3 ways. One is to basically have Waqf-based microfinance institutions, to use Waqf to guarantee financing of small and micro enterprises, and also Waqf-based microfinance institutions, and of course have Waqf-based takaful, which exists now, but mainly to have micro takaful to have the social orientation. I'll go over quickly these how Waqf can be used in these 3 kind of activities. The first is to have Waqf-based microfinance institutions, and this is actually nothing new. If you look at the history of Waqf, there used to be not microfinance, quote unquote, but financing. They used to finance the poor and the needy, and we have examples of cash Waqf in Turkey, and also examples of what they call Qard Hasan funds in Iran even now. Actually, these Qard Hasan funds, they started as Waqf and they've become very large non-bank financial institutions providing financing to the poor and the needy, and they still exist in Iran. So what we are suggesting is to bring the concept of Waqf to microfinance institutions, and it can be done in 3 ways. One is you have the corpus of course it has to be cash Waqf. So use the corpus of Waqf, invest in some assets, financial and real assets, and whatever returns you get, you can use it for microfinance. But the problem with this is that the amount you will be investing in microfinancing will be very small, because it will be only the returns which are given to the micro entrepreneurs. The other is to use the corpus of Waqf itself in financing, and this was what was done in Turkey. Cash Waqf was given as Qard Hasan interest-free loans, and also, as I said, this is being done in Iran. The other way is to basically use Waqf as capital to initiate microfinance institutions. And I have a few slides on this, because I think this is an area where we can really use Waqf to enhance the microfinance activities of the Islamic financial sector. Islamic banks are not providing microfinance except a few cases. So one way to, I think, introduce social element in Islamic finance is to finance the micro entrepreneurs, and this can be done by using Waqf as capital to create these institutions, and then just operate like any other microfinance institution to provide financing to the small and micro enterprises. Now, of course, when you bring in Waqf, then again, because of its features that the corpus of the Waqf must be intact, there are some implications in terms of how the operations of microfinance institutions have to be conducted. You cannot take too much risks which can affect the capital, which is basically Waqf. So there are implications of using Waqf, and you have to be very careful in terms of keeping the Waqf intact. Here I have the structure of this balance sheet of the Waqf-based microfinance institution. The capital will be coming from Waqf. You can have saving deposits like other microfinance institutions have, and you can have additional funds from Waqf and other sources. And one way to introduce additional sources to issue Waqf certificates. People may be interested to get, say, £100 or £500 certificates. Basically, people contributing to this Waqf fund, which can be used for microfinance activities. As for financing, of course, it will use all the financing modes which are used by Islamic financial institutions. But I think Qard will be an important part of Islamic microfinance institution based on a Waqf. And that probably shows the social role of Waqf-based microfinance institutions. Now, as I mentioned, one of the key things in a Waqf-based microfinance institution is to ensure that the capital, which is Waqf, remains intact, because that's one of the features of a Waqf. And that means that there has to be some steps, risk management steps taken, among others to create different reserves which can be used to protect the corpus of the capital of Waqf. So I have suggested here some reserves, for example, takaful reserves, which can be contributed by the beneficiaries themselves. This is something which is used by microfinance institutions now. So you basically can replicate it for Waqf-based microfinance institutions. For depositors, they can contribute to the profit equalizing reserves, which can be used for providing them competitive returns. And because it's a Waqf-based institution, if there's any surplus generated, that can be added to the capital of the Waqf, and the reserve can be used if in case there's a loss, to cover the losses. The other way to capital or the corpus of the Waqf is to actually have a guarantee from a third party, that if the corpus of the Waqf goes beyond or below the original amount, the third party will come and guarantee. And one of these third party can be actually a Waqf organizations itself. So it can guarantee that when the capital of a microfinance institution goes below a certain level, a separate Waqf can actually guarantee this capital. Now, the other use of Waqf can be used as guarantees. Now, if you look at the traditional fiqh on guarantees, it is actually a gratuitous contract, meaning that Waqf should be, guarantee should be given free of charge. Now, of course, nowadays a lot of Islamic banks and financial institutions, they have, they have got fatwas and they're providing guarantees at a charge. Now, if we look at the small and medium enterprises, one of the key problems these enterprises have is the high risks. And a lot of financial institutions, they do not want to finance these small and medium enterprises and even micro enterprises because of the risks. And a lot of times what happens is the governments come in and provide the guarantees. And I think that some Waqf institutions can play this role to help develop small, micro and microfinance, micro enterprises. They can provide, Waqf can provide the guarantees so that these enterprises can be financed. Finally, I'm looking at the time. Finally, we have Waqf-based takaful. As I mentioned, Waqf-based takaful actually exists in Pakistan. The dominant modes are actually mudaraba and muqala-based takaful. In Pakistan, they have added Waqf, and the logic is that it is less controversial than mudaraba and muqala-based. It is being used for takaful and re-takaful. What the social role of the sector can be enhanced if you can have micro takaful, which uses if the profit motive of the takaful companies do not permit them to go for micro takaful, maybe a Waqf-based micro takaful can provide takaful services or insurance services to small, medium, and micro enterprises. The model of Waqf-based takaful is, those who are aware of it, it's going to be very similar to a mudaraba or a wakala-based model. So basically the participants, they contribute to a Waqf fund. This Waqf fund is managed by the takaful operator, either on a mudaraba basis or a wakala basis. If it's a mudara basis, the profit is shared between the Waqf fund and the shareholders. And if it's a wakala based, there's a fee which goes to the shareholders. Whatever surplus comes here to the Waqf fund is used for policy benefits, takaful, reserves, and the surplus is then distributed to the participants. This is being done in Pakistan for general takaful, and I think Waqf can be actually used in this shareholder funds. If this is coming from Waqf, then this model can be used for micro takaful to provide insurance services to small and micro enterprises. I think I am almost there in terms of time. The conclusion is that Waqf played a very important role in providing socioeconomic services in the past, and I think this institution can be revived and integrated with the Islamic financial sector to bring in the social role of Islamic finance. And unfortunately, the current status of Waqf in many countries is that it is very not used productively. And I think there is need to revive this institution, very important and traditional institution, to provide actually the services which Islamic financial sector is not providing in terms of in performing the social roles. Specifically, you're talking about Islamic finance providing services to the small micro enterprises, the poor. And I think that Waqf sector, if it is brought together with the Islamic finance principles, this can be done. With that, I conclude my talk and open up for questions.